Nice. G'day everyone. Welcome to our next video on the elements of narrative, and this is point of view. So here's a quick review of the elements of narrative that we're studying. So what is point of view? Basically, point of view is who is telling the story. So that could be the narrator, who could be a third person narrator, and we've got, generally speaking, an omniscient narrator, which is where the narrator is not very close to any of the characters. We get to see a broad field of the characters. So a lot of literature from the 19th century is written like this. Or it could be a limited narrator, which is where the narrator zooms in on one character or two or three characters, and we get to see the characters' internal thoughts and feelings. So it's very limited in that we have a limited number of characters the narrator focuses on. Or it could be a first-person narrator. So this is where the narrator is telling their own story. I did this, I saw that, I felt this. That's the first-person narrator. Another element of point of view is, well, how trustworthy is the narrator? So we've got cases where a narrator could be reliable or unreliable. We've also got things such as naive narrator, and To Kill a Mockingbird is a great example of the naive narrator. So why does point of view matter? Well, from the perspective of the writer, selecting the point of view that tells the best story is really important. And it's also who, as in which point of view, will have the best relationship with the audience, bearing in mind what the writer wants to achieve. Remember, the writer has a purpose to the story. That might be to pull out particular messages or themes, and that means that the writer is going to make choices that manipulate the reader to feel and think a certain way. And so choosing who's telling the story is a really important piece of that. And from the reader's perspective, knowing who's telling the story can put the reader close to the story and get them really engaged and can cause them sympathy, or conversely it could push them away from the story and cause anxiety. Sometimes the writer wants to do this. They want to cause anxiety. They want to make the reader feel uncomfortable. This is particularly true of stories where the writer puts us very close to an antagonist. This is probably more common with film, where we follow and sometimes start to sympathize with the bad guy, with the villain in the story. And the whole point is to make us question, well, what's good and bad, for example, or what are society's values when we look at these people. So it's intentional whether we're trying to achieve sympathy or anxiety with the people in the story. So what's the connection between point of view and the other elements? Well, for plot, how the narrator views the events shapes the reader's interpretation of those events. So I'm sure we've all had an experience where we got in trouble at school, we got in trouble at home, and I tell the events this way, where I'm the victim of the event, and then the other person tells the story their way, in which no, he's not the victim, he's the villain, and I'm the villain, I'm the victim. And so who's telling the story matters in terms of how the events are shaped. Structure. Structural choices will come about because of the point of view. Does it need to be chronological? Will there be flashbacks and flash forwards, for example? And so oftentimes, if we see a story where the main character is perhaps older and they're reminiscing, we might get lots of flashbacks. Stylistic devices. Point of view changes often come with changes in stylistic devices. So we see this a lot when the point of view character changes or the narration switches to a different character. Reading The Expanse, just finished some of the Expanse books, and they do that. They have a character who swears a lot, and they have a character who doesn't swear very much. And when we're watching the person who swears a lot, the stylistic devices reflect that, and there's a lot more swearing and coarse language. And then when the point of view shifts to another character, then the language, the stylistic devices changes a bit, so we get to see that we're following different people, and those people in the story are having different experiences. So moving on to genre. Genre is important because we are going to have, we as in the readers, are going to have expectations of the genre we are reading in, and the point of view choices often match those expectations. So for example, if it's romance is going to have either a first person point of view or a limited third person point of view. Omniscient doesn't particularly work well for romance because we want to see the thoughts and emotions of the characters we're reading about, whereas omniscient point of view doesn't really let us do that. Setting. How close is the narrator to the world in which the story is set? Does the narrator act as a guide? Is a good way to think about setting. Or maybe there needs to be a character who's not the protagonist but can act as essentially a tour guide for the reader. So this is particularly common where we're dealing with stories that are set in a sci-fi fantasy world, or where we're dealing with a very technical situation, and so the person telling the story might be someone not from that world. So whether that's a counter-terrorist special forces elite unit that are going about their job, they are not going to have to explain all the acronyms or all the hand signals that those types of soldiers use. So we need to have someone telling the story who can act as a go-between, who needs to learn those things and can show that to the audience as well. Theme. Point of view choices help bring out the theme. For example, a naive narrator helps bring out the ideas of growth and maturity. If we have an unreliable narrator, that can help bring out ideas of trust or mental health, for example, or societal issues. Moving on, conflict. How close the narrator is to the story will often determine the level of conflict that the reader is focused on. And I keep getting into the romance genre here, but as an example, the romance genre needs to be focused on the internal conflicts or the interpersonal conflicts, and so the narration is going to be very close to those. If it steps back, let's go to the other extreme, say War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, then we've got a broad sweeping narration, and the levels of conflict range all the way from the inner to the interpersonal to the societal to the regional level. And finally, character. How the reader interprets the characters is a function of the point of view. If the point of view is focused on the protagonist, generally we're going to feel sympathy and start supporting the protagonist, whoever they are. That's generally what happens. But we could engage in some unreliable narration and maybe take the point of view that casts the protagonist as less than the ideal hero. All right, that's it for now. And as always, any questions, leave them for me. Thank you.